Hello, I'm Linda McIntosh from Studio ABC for my Facebook group, art group, and my YouTube channel are under the same name. Notice that the C is spelled S-E-E because we see the art. But most of my students call me Miss Mac. This is a project that I call Organic Windows. We're going to do organic shapes and then do organic shapes inside of organic shapes. On organic shapes and value. I'd like to remind you that shape and value are both elephants of art. Elephants of art? I don't think so. They are both elements of art. And these are used like tools for building a house. You use building tools to build a house, similar to the way you use elements of art to build the principles of design. This is how we make art compositions. I'm going to begin this composition with a mixed media book, the paper in a mixed media book, and a Sharpie permanent marker pen. My first step was to draw organic shapes, and organic shapes would be shapes like you see in nature, not like squares, triangles, rectangles, crescents, diamonds, those kinds, but natural shapes. These look like pebbles to me. I filled the entire page with large pebble-like shapes. I didn't want to make them too small because I know that later I need to go into these little window pebbles. These shapes will become windows later. I need to go inside of those and do more drawings, and I need to leave it large enough that I have plenty of space to do that. I made this composition with 3 different pencils, just a regular everyday school pencil, a number 2, and a B, just a B, which means soft, and a 4H pencil. Now, I also found a typewriter eraser, which I thought was going to be perfect, but it was so old that it smeared things, so I had to add a different kind of eraser. My best eraser is an art gum anyway. I shaded the pebble shapes, and then I used also a paper stump to kind of smooth that out. I did the shading very lightly with my 4H pencil, and you don't want to press down on a pencil that has the letter H on it. That's a hard lead pencil, and those are going to make holes in your paper if you try to force them to become dark. But they're great for keeping your light value. And the value is the lightness or darkness of a color. That's something that we need to understand. It doesn't have anything to do with how much a painting costs or how much art supplies are. So I kept working on each little pebble, getting them shaded in, one at a time, trying to keep the tone very even and very pale, very light value. This can be tedious work for large spaces, so take your time and just do the best that you can. Relax into it. Now you need to think of these as windows, and I thought of them as being open windows and how I could see things through them and maybe see the same object through several of these windows. So I began drawing other organic shapes that would intersect underneath these windows. Now this organic shape that I'm drawing now will also become a window later for something else. So again, I want to keep them fairly large. So if I looked through these shaded windows that I already have in the first value there, and I could see through them, I might see a whole other window behind them, but it might be in 3 different windows or 2 different windows, or maybe just the edge of the shape. Right now, all of the pebbles, even the ones I'm drawing behind these windows, I keep calling them windows and pebbles. Just ignore that and think about it all being the same thing. But the pebble shapes that I'm drawing underneath these pebble windows are all the same value. But we're going to change that in a moment. Sometimes I tended not to quite come down to the line, so I would go back and adjust those things and make it look like it was behind the first set. As I move on down, I have to remember not to bump into the shapes that I've already drawn. That can get confusing at times. You might think that you're drawing a brand new shape and realize you've just intersected a shape that's behind this window that you've already drawn. So kind of watch out for that. I made a video for my students of triangles and organic shapes together. I know I noticed later in one that I did where I did triangles and then I did organic shapes and then triangles and organic shapes, I realized later that I had bumped into other shapes and it got a little confusing where I was supposed to shade. But the final outcome came out okay, so I didn't really worry about that too much. I keep noticing as I watch this video that I had a habit of not closing my shapes very well. I didn't come right up to the line, so I had to go back and fix a lot of things, like this right here. One of the things that I find that a lot of students have trouble doing is turning their paper. You should turn your paper to make it easiest for you to shade. I'm not really holding my pencil the way I normally do to shade. I think I was trying to keep my hand out of the way of the camera. But turning your paper, there's nothing wrong with that, whether it's a realistic picture or an abstract picture like this. Trying to get a little smudge off of that, but it'll come off when I keep shading. Now I picked up that school pencil for this shading because if you try to force a H pencil to get darker, then you can be in a heap of trouble. It will really mess up things and it'll be hard to shade on top of, and you'll cut down the grit of your paper. The tooth is the actual term of your paper, and then no more lead will stick. It's just a mess. This is what I had once I shaded the second set of windows. It's a good practice because you're shading on top of shade. And that's the way you build up a drawing. A lot of kids or a lot of new students try to get as dark as they can in the first round. They'll shade their light area and then they'll shade their next light area and try to push that pencil. But if you build up layers, it seems to work much better. I worked on this between classes, and one of my students walked in at this point and said, "That looks like a bunch of blood cells in the body." So maybe it's not windows, maybe it's a bunch of blood cells. It's now time to start the third set of windows. And I have to contain those inside that second layer of value. The second layer of value is the second layer of windows. I'm adding the third layer of windows just inside those perimeters. So I'm not getting into the very light shading that I did at first. I found that when I did the triangles and the alternation of triangles with organic shapes, that it got a little more confusing. This seems to be easier for me to actually see where those shapes are and not bump into previous shapes. I'll fast forward here a bit and get the rest of the shapes in. I really don't draw that fast. I was very relaxed in this. I found it very relaxing to do this kind of work. I started my third value shading with the same just regular everyday school pencil, and I just went over it again and I pressed just a tiny bit harder, but not a lot because I didn't want that slick shiny look to it. That ruins the tooth of the paper and it won't hold the pigment anymore of the pencil. So I'm doing this lightly, but I'm making sure that I get a third value. As I narrate this, I realize that I am definitely trying to keep my hand back where you can see what I'm doing, but I think I need to make a video about how to hold your pencil, because there's so many different ways to get different effects by the way that you hold a pencil. If you can make comments, let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like to see. See that little boo-boo right there? That is because this shape didn't match this shape over here and I adjusted it. So I thought maybe I could find a way to fix it later. It's too often my students will just throw something away if they mess up. And I ask them, please don't throw it away until you show it to me. This is the way I fixed it. I turned that into a shape underneath. I always try to remind students that it might not be a mistake at all. It might be your right brain trying to overpower your left brain, telling you there's something else you can do here. But the right brain has no word power. The left brain has word power, and it can state it out plainly to you what it wants. But we have to suppress that left brain sometimes just a little bit till we can get some creative juices flowing. I've been into brain research and how it affects art for a number of years, and if you have any great articles that you've read pertaining to that, I would love for you to share that with me in the comments. At this point in the drawing, I realized if I would just do like one shape at a time and then shade it in, I wouldn't have that problem of bumping into another shape. So that's what I did here. And I was about finished with the third set of values when I took this picture. And I have some areas that had little light gaps in them, and I went back and worked on the edges of these. I realized that I had not filled in all of the layers of this set of windows that I needed to. So I did get a little confused on where I was at some point, but I kept studying it and working on it and drew the rest of the layers in and shaded them in, making sure that I kind of knew where I was. There's some more gaps. I do that often, always having to go back and fill in those little gaps. I'll fast forward here. I intended to do yet another layer, and I could have done that if I used my Sharpie pen. I mean another layer besides what I'm adding right now. But I had more layers than I even realized because I didn't even count the white space as a layer. So it really turned out about like I had intended anyway. And I went back and I thickened some of the lines so that the top layer of lines would have thick lines. And I didn't try to make them the same thickness, but I tried to gradually go from thick to thin on these just to give it a little more interest, a little more power. I often teach my students that when you have something closer to you, it's larger. So I thought this top layer is closer to me. I would make the lines thicker and larger, and that would give it more perspective. As I mentioned, this is a good study for not only learning about values, but also for pencil drawing, because you need to build up layers in your pencil drawings. In this video, I have shown you that you can shade on top of shade. Start with your light shade and move to your darker ones. If you start with your dark, you might end up smearing it into the light areas. These layers that I keep mentioning are value layers. Every layer is a different darker value as I go down. I'll be showing you next week how I used color to make the different layers of windows. So watch for that video, subscribe, and hit that little bell. And I understand that if you hit the bell that you get notification every time I put up a new video. Thanks for watching.